In a cold, darkened room, a local farmer lay dying in bed. He had been perfectly well only a few hours ago, and due to the rapid onset of a strange illness, a healer was called. The farmer told of how he was suddenly struck with an agonizing pain in his leg. After a short while it spread to his arms, then his stomach, and finally into his head. Strangely, there was no other symptoms, and the healer could not source the man's quite apparent agony. The young healer had seen such things before, and the only real possibility was that the man had been cursed by dark powers. Suddenly the farmer sat bolt upright, screaming and clutching his heart. His then lifeless body slowly fell back onto his deathbed. At that exact time, at the edge of the village, in a small wooden hut, a hunched woman sat, with a wicked smile upon her face, as she forced the last of many pins into the heart of a clay doll. This was the hideous power of the clay corpse. It was said in Scotland that one of the greatest evils a witch could manifest was the Corp Creadhach, or clay corpse. A witch wishing to do harm to an individual would create a small body of clay, which would represent her unfortunate target. The Corp Creadhach would then have all manner of curses and incantations uttered over it, before being used by the witch to inflict pain upon her unknowing victim. Although known as the clay corpse, it was not uncommon to see effigies made from other substances, such as wood or wax. The clay-built Corp Creadhach were laid in shallow, slow-moving rivers, and as the clay wasted away in the water, so would the body it mirrored. The victim would be struck with illness or weakness, and once the clay was gone, so was what remained of their life. It was known, however, that if the clay corpse was found, it could be taken from the river and carefully preserved. This would break the witch's spell and heal those afflicted by this horrible curse. In the lowlands, wax-built Corp Creadhach were placed next to the fire, and as the figure slowly melted, the poor victim would feel as if they were burning alive. No matter the material, if a witch wanted to enact a particularly painful death or grim torture, she would insert sharp pins, nails, or even feathers into the small figure. This would produce an unworldly pain for her victim. The positions of the pins were known to be an important art to the witches, as with correct placement, the pins could cause anything from mild illness to instant death. The Corp Creadhach appears in many a gruesome tale over the years. The first tale I have to tell you comes from the west of Scotland, and involves a young cattle thief named Gare. He stole so many cows from MacLean of Dowart that he became the clan chief's most hated nemesis. One night, when MacIan was out scouring the MacLean land, he passed a small chapel at midnight. Strangely, he spotted a light shining from the chapel window. So the young Scotsman crept closer to investigate, and there within the chapel were 3 witches up to the most horrible devilry. On the altar laid a small clay replica of MacLean of Dowart. It was covered in metal pins. Next to the effigy, one final pin remained. The young thief had heard of the Corp Creadhach and knew that this pin meant death for his enemy, MacLean. Although he did not like the man, he did not have it in his heart to see him dead. MacIan burst into the chapel, sword drawn, and commanded the witches to flee. And that they did. All 3 of the women scattered, fearing for their lives. MacIan picked up the Corp Creadhach and rushed to the home of MacLean of Dowart. There he found the man at death's door and explained all he had seen. Then in front of MacLean and his wife, the young thief began to remove the pins from the clay corpse. One by one, the pins fell to the floor, and with each he removed, the dying man was pulled further from the grip of death. By the time the final pin was removed, MacLean of Dowart was completely healed. In fact, he felt better than he ever had. And from that day forward, the cattle thief and the landowner became the greatest of friends. A similar incident happened in Perthshire. where a local minister named McGilvery had become incredibly ill of recent. He was seized by an intense burning pain all over his body and had been slowly wasting away for some time. The nature of his affliction could not be comprehended by any that visited the poor man. But early one morning, a kindly woman from the neighbouring village set out to visit the minister. While walking through the woods, she caught sight of another woman whom she knew from the village. She was instantly suspicious, as rumours had it that this woman was a witch. Keeping some distance between herself and the supposed witch, the woman began to follow. After some time, the witch stopped at a hollow, stooped down and buried something small in the dirt. She then looked around her and walked off. Once the witch was out of sight, the other woman rushed forward and began to uncover whatever was hidden. Moving the recently disturbed soil, she came upon an odd wooden statue, stuck all over with pins, which resembled the minister. Not knowing what form of dark artifact she had uncovered, the woman hurried to the minister's house. Just like the landowner in the previous tale, with each pin removed, the minister regained some health, until he was completely healed from this wicked curse. It is not known what happened to the witch, but judging by other tales of the time, it was not pleasant. There's an interesting tale from the land of Ross, where a warrior by the name of Donald was said to have angered some women of the village. What he did not know was that 3 of these women were witches, and on one night, when Donald had been called away to battle, the witches met in a damp woodland cave. There they would fashion a Corp Creadhach in the shape of Donald. The remainder of the night would be spent reciting incantations and curses, and by the dawn, the foul magic was complete. With a sick joy, the woman began to insert pins into the clay figure, and by their estimate, this would be enough to cripple and torture the warrior. But after a few days, Donald returned and seemed to be in perfect health. The women were infuriated and smashed the clay corpse to pieces, cursing it as useless. What they did not know was that during the battle, Donald had lost an ear. This was not represented in the Corp Creadhach, and so it had no power over the man. The use of clay to make the Corp Creadhach was far more prevalent in the Highlands, where access to materials like wax were limited. The Corp Creadhach has a lot in common with poppets. Poppets were small dolls made from cloth, wood, rope, clay or wax, and were said to be used in magic. These dolls were also made to represent a person, and any actions upon the doll would be transferred to the person it represented. It is worth noting, however, that unlike the Scottish clay corpse, the poppet could be used for evil magic or healing or beneficial magic. The origin of these dolls and their use in magic is unknown, but tales of poppet-like figures are found in the history of most world cultures. One of the earliest tales dates all the way back to ancient Egypt, where the enemies of Ramesses III used wax images of the pharaoh to bring about his untimely death. In Scotland, the Corp Creadhach were still used well into the 20th century, and so this millennia-old dark magic may still exist today. Thank you for listening.